Hey friends, welcome back to the Alternatives Podcast. We have a great conversation ahead of us with our friend Kenny Winter, but wanted to give a quick disclaimer before we get started. Kenneth Winter offers products and services using the following business names: Martinez and Winter, Emeritus Investment Company, LLC, and Emeritus Advisory Services. AIC and AAS are not affiliated with Martinez and Winter. AIC and AAS are also not affiliated with Alternatives Medical Clinic. Representatives do not provide legal or tax advice. You should consult your tax or legal professional for your specific needs. Now that we have the disclaimer, let's jump right into a conversation with Kenny. Hey friends, welcome back to the Alternatives Podcast. We have a big topic today and I'm very excited. We have Kenny Winter, who is a financial consultant. He's also on our board of directors, and we're very excited for you to meet him. This is a topic that I think a lot of us kind of have a lot of uncertainty and a little stress about. So I'm very excited to be diving into this. Kenny, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, good morning. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Kana. I'm encouraged to be here and hope you all are having a good morning. I am from Escondido and Valley Center. I'm partner in a firm here in Escondido for the last 25 plus years. We're financial consultants, and we deal a lot in taxes, businesses, retirement, pretty much anything financial from that point of view. So it is a big subject. Lots of people have lots of questions about it. The Bible talks a lot about it. So it is a big thing. So I won't try to answer everybody's question, but some of the really good questions that we have for our podcast, I think would be good for perhaps our listeners to listen to.
Very cool. Well, just diving right in, who needs to file taxes?
Mm-hmm. So taxes are, anybody who has earned income should file a tax return. It may feel like the old adage of death and taxes. You never get away from one of those two. But, honestly, a lot of the social benefits that are sponsored by the government, both local, state, and federal, are tied to our tax returns. So child tax credits, for example, and other kinds of beneficial aid are tied to tax returns. So I would say anybody, even no matter how small, if I have any kind of earned income, that means I go to some sort of job, any kind, 1099 job, W-2 job, file a tax return. It's a good idea. It is obviously the law too, but above $600, but there's a law. But I would say no matter what amount you're making, file a tax return. It really just, they probably withhold the taxes anyway in a W-2 environment. So perhaps some refunds are in store for you. And then also some government assistance as well.
Okay, great. Well, then in reference to that, if we have a small amount coming in, we might think, oh, why do I need to file? But what are we paying taxes on? And why are we and who are we paying them to?
Okay. What are we paying taxes on? You're paying taxes on what we call taxable income. That is not where you start. You start at what's called gross income. Gross income is everything that you make. And then you get to deduct certain things. So, for example, if you give something to charity, that is a deduction from your gross income. So not necessarily everything you make do you pay tax on, but generally speaking, everybody has a few deductions that you could claim. If we have children, I have 4 children, by the way. You can claim them as dependents and you get some deduction. Doesn't come anywhere close to paying for raising them, but that's okay. But like I mentioned, you do have some credit sometimes. So it's a fairly complicated formula. There's some really good software out there. I have nothing to do with TurboTax or anything like that, but that's probably one of the more common ones that I find. And but there's several out there that could do the taxes. It's somewhat complicated, but the government is trying to pay close attention to how complicated it is, and they're trying to simplify it. So for example, if I have a W-2 job, it means I work for a company, they pay me, and they withhold the taxes up front. So they withhold Social Security, they withhold Medicare, they withhold some income taxes, and I have a W-2. If I don't have too many other deductions, like for a home or other things like that, the government does say, instead of lining up all these deductions, we're just going to give you a set amount. So it's what's called a standard deduction. And if I don't have more individual deductions that exceed that amount, I don't even have to worry about what we call itemizing. You don't have to make a list. You don't have to keep track of them. You just take what the government gives you, and literally you take your gross income minus your standard deduction, and then pay tax. And then probably, if you do the withholding right, you have paid in about what you owe. What I say about, that's an estimate. So withholdings from your paychecks are estimates. We pay to the state of California, because if you do live in California, and then we pay to the federal income tax. We're talking income taxes.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah. Now you also mentioned a couple other things, and because we have a broad listener base, I'm just going to ask you to explain a little bit more. You talked about Social Security, Medicare; those are taxes as well. So for our listeners who may not know what those taxes are, could you just give a brief description of what those are for?
Yeah. So in addition to income taxes, if you are paid in a W-2 wage, whether it's hourly or salaried, you pay Social Security taxes, and it'll have a bunch of little acronyms on your paycheck. It'll say FICA, FUTA, MED, and then stuff like that. Those are federal taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's also some EDD, which is unemployment. So if I lose my job, like what's going on right now, that's a function of the state. If I'm paying into Medicare, that's a function of the federal. So the federal and the state both withhold certain amounts from my paycheck. And because I'm an employee, they charge that to the employer also. Mm-hmm. So in case I feel like, man, I'm paying all this Social Security tax for people who are on Social Security, and I'm only, 30 or 27, don't worry, your company is paying half and you're paying half. Mm-hmm. So it's not all on me. Half of it's on the employer, half of it's on the employee. But that is going into, for example, Social Security. Anyone over 66 years old is probably collecting Social Security. So the money that I'm paying in from my wage is going to support people who are in their 60s and 70s. And likewise, when I get to be 60s and 70s, some young people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s will be supporting me and you and whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's just a social benefit program that was started way, way back a long time ago. Same with Medicare. So most of these things, I don't directly benefit probably until I'm older. Mm-hmm. Although unemployment, you do. So, and that's been a very big highlight in this year of 2020 with COVID, that they've been expanding unemployment benefits, and that's at the state level.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So
Thank you for
those are
that.
it's very good to look at. There are numerous taxes that are withheld from your paycheck.
Yes, and thank you for that explanation, because I think there's some of us who are a little bit older that know that information just from, living life a little bit longer, but those are a lot of things that it doesn't make sense. We've got all these things on our paycheck stub, and we don't know, okay, all this money is, we can take it out, but I don't understand. And then understanding that the employer is putting money in for us as well for different programs, and that's a benefit that we receive as employees also. So yeah. Hannah, did you have anything else to add to that, or any questions?
Oh, well, I was just thinking that that is a super helpful explanation, because I think a lot of times we also don't recognize from our company's perspective that they have to pay for us too. It's not like they just give us money and cool, they're done. It's like they have to pay taxes for us too. And then I think, kind of just in agreement with what you guys were saying, is that this year, I think, has really showed all of us why we pay taxes. And I know so many of us can be like, we don't want to pay taxes, this is meh. But it's this year, seeing that so many people have been helped by that. And when Kana, you were saying you've lived life a little bit longer. Yeah. And I think this year, for all of us that might be a little bit younger with less life experience, we've seen a lot of why we've been doing what we've been doing and why we have to pay taxes. But I do definitely agree that these are great things to be talking about. And Kana, thank you for asking for that clarification, because there were even some things that I was a little uncertain about that I was able to get some clarity. So thank you.
Yeah, well, and just because there's a little bit of age on this side, there's plenty of stuff I have no idea about. So I'm like, hey, we've got Kenny on the line here, so we can have him explain it a little bit better, because it gets confusing.
Sure.
It really does.
It really does. Yeah.
And this is the, like most people do earn money via W-2 from jobs, but there's also a pretty large group of people that maybe have a home-based business, or I own my own business, and so we call them self-employed, and they might get paid via what's called the 1099. So if I work for Alternatives as an employee, I get a W-2 at the end of the year, but I could be a consultant to Alternatives and other companies like it, and so then I would get what's called the 1099. Just make no mistake, I'm still paying the same taxes. I'm still paying all my Social Security, still paying all the Medicare. And in fact, because I am self-employed, I'm considered both the employer and the employee, so I get to pay both halves. So in that tax structure, they call it self-employment tax, but it's really the exact same thing that you and I are all paying as W-2 people. So there's really not a difference. It is fairly equal footing. The main difference would be that when a person operates their own business, they can have deductions for the things that help them operate the business. Other than that, but you still get down to the end of the day, I made money, I'm going to pay tax on that money, income tax, Social Security tax, Medicare tax. We're all in the same boat, basically.
Yeah. And there's no way to get around it. We all want to get around it sometimes. How do we not have to pay taxes? And there are different deductions and different creative ways to minimize tax, but that's for another podcast. Maybe
that's right. There are ways to minimize it, and you can make a year-end gift to Alternatives if you like. So that helps reach.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
But, so there are things like that. Sure.
Yeah, great. Well, what type of information does someone need then when filing their taxes? So what would they have to pull together to file their taxes?
Okay, maybe I'll start at the simple area. If you're not, if you're going to take what's called the standard deduction. So like if I rent a place where I live and I don't really have children, or, basically I go to work, I make my money, and maybe I'm married, maybe I'm single. You really only need the W-2. And I'm assuming everybody knows their Social Security number and stuff like that. But outside of that, you just need everything that you would need to file the tax return is on that W-2 that you get in about January. So that'll span everything from January to December. And it's a report. A copy goes to you, and a copy goes to the state, and a copy goes to the Fed. So everybody knows what I made. And it also says how much Social Security, how much Medicare, how much unemployment, how much federal, how much state. So everything's on that report. At that level, that's about all you need. If you're going to go, if you're going to be deducting other things that are in excess of what the deduction that the government gives us, the standard deduction, for example, charitable contributions, you can deduct that against my gross income. Then you'll need a complete list of all the places that you made charitable contributions to, both non-cash and cash. Cash is pretty self-explanatory. I wrote a check, I sent a PayPal, I did whatever. If it's non-cash, you need to get things valued if they're worth more than like a few $100s, like $500. So if I gave a car, I'd have to get it valued, something like that. Let's see, if you own a condo or a home or something like that, all those things will be sent to me in probably about January. So how much interest did I pay? I can deduct the interest. How much state taxes? You can deduct your state taxes on the federal return and vice versa. So you just have to keep track of all that stuff if you're going to what we call itemize, which is another schedule on your return called the Schedule A, and we itemize all the different things that you are able to deduct against your gross income. If you make any retirement contributions like IRAs or Roth IRA contributions, you just have to have evidence about when you made those and timeliness of them, and evidence that yes, in fact, I did put $6,000 into an IRA or that kind of a thing. The government is very encouraging of people saving for their latter years. So they do allow you to deduct that against your income. And so anything that you're going to deduct against your income, I would say in general, you need to have good books and records of it. If I'm just going to take my income, take the standard amount that the government gives me, I really don't have to keep any records, because they're just saying as a single individual, you get about this much. As a married couple, you get about this much, and they let you go. So as a married person, it's about, or as a married filing joint, which is, you get about $24,000. So unless I'm doing deductions of greater than $24,000, or even as an individual, about $12,000, if I don't think I'm giving away or having deductions of that amount, I really don't have to do anything. And you can do that in TurboTax in about 5 minutes.
Wow.
So.
That's great. You kind of covered a lot of our topics and questions right there in that question.
Well, I do this a lot.
No, that's great though. I think that was really helpful and a great way to communicate those details. One extra question before Hannah jumps in as well is the tax forms. How does someone know what tax form they need? Now, there's different ones for businesses versus individuals, but tell us a little bit about the tax forms.
Okay. Yeah. So as an individual, whether I'm filing individually or as filing as a married filing joint, there's several different ways I can file. But let's just say as a person, I'm filing a form called a 1040, 1040. And so that's the number that the government gives to people filing tax returns. And so if I'm not married, but I have a child, I get more deductions. If I'm married, but we both file, my spouse and I, we file separate returns, you can do that. You can be married and file a joint return. But everybody files, if you're an individual in all those situations, you file what's called a 1040. If what we were saying, like I'm a W-2 person, I get a paycheck, I file a W-2. And if I just take what's called that standard deduction of, if let's say I'm married, I'm filing joint return, I get 24,000, I just take that 24,000. There's probably not a lot we need to do. And the government is really trying to aim at, I feel, making that fairly simple, that most people shouldn't need to go spend a lot of money to file a tax return to pay taxes to the government, right? The whole experience is an outlay, right? So why should I have to pay a lot of money to figure out how much I need to pay to the federal and the state government? So I think they've done an admirable job of making it fairly easy if I don't have too complicated of a return. I would say if I have a business, I probably should get some help. When I say a business, I have a home-based business. Anything. I mean, I'm a business owner. I get help. It's too complicated for me, even though I know some about it. It's when you get down to the nitty gritty, it really pays to have someone help you with that, a tax professional. Those people are called CPAs, enrolled agents, accountants, H&R Blocks of the world, those kinds of companies, people that, do this for a living and are specialists and that kind of a thing. So that's very helpful. So if I do run a business, I can do that as my own person, so I can do that as Kenny Winter, or you can go a step more complicated and start forming entities called corporations or partnerships, or there's a whole smorgasbord of entities that you can do, but most of them boil down to corporations, partnerships, and what are called limited liability companies. Those you definitely want to have someone helping you out. Those get pretty complicated for most average people like me. So yeah, you probably want to, so for if I've got a job and I don't take too many deductions, and even if I do take the list of deductions, what are called itemized, so I'm gonna deduct, which I'm totally entitled to, my state taxes, my charitable, my home interest, those kinds of things, and they're gonna amount to, let's say, $30,000, because I get 24 for free. So if I have more than 24, I'm gonna make a list of them and put them on my tax return. even most people, they can do that with TurboTax. That's not too terribly complicated. Not trying to dissuade anyone from using an accountant or an H&R Block. Anybody who wants to do that too, I mean, that's great, because they probably uncover, oh, did you know that if you did this much more, you would get a higher child tax credit or an educational credit or those kinds of things. So working with someone who knows the ins and outs, because the whole tax code is, there's a lot of engineering, social engineering. So when Congress makes the tax code, the president doesn't, Supreme Court doesn't, Congress does. So if they want to encourage a certain behavior or discourage a certain behavior, a lot of times they'll build it into the tax code. So this year in 2020, they wanted to encourage companies to keep people on payroll, right? Because we had COVID and China shuts down, then US shuts down and Europe shuts down and everybody shuts down. And everyone's like, oh my gosh. I mean, I don't know how many clients I talk to is like, I can't afford to keep my employees. So the government says, whoa, time out. We're going to build into the tax code. And they passed this enormous tax bill in March called the CARES Act. And all it is it's a bunch of it is a lot of stuff. It was a whole lot of stuff. And I'm not going to pretend to know all of it. But a lot of it was tax-driven policies to try to encourage us not crashing the bus of the U.S. economy and the world economy, frankly. But we're only concerned with Congress can only make laws for the U.S. So they put in place things like, if you want to we'll give you money to take care of your employees and keep them on payroll, right? The government feels it's important to support nonprofit charities because they know that nonprofit charities do a better job than government programs. So they encourage you if you give this money to a charitable organization, will allow you to deduct it from your taxes, all those kinds of things. So, there is a lot in there. So I think it is important to use someone to help you. So again, I'm not at all dissuading someone who's using, but if you can save some money by the turbo taxes. And if I'm just going to take the standard deduction, I think that's probably a good place for someone who is going to do what's called this 1040. And that would be the best place to start. If you have any kind of a job or income, you have to have what's called earned income. So I can't have someone give me money and file a tax return. That's not earned income. So I have to, just think I go to a job of some type. I should file a return.
One thing that I wanted to add on to what you said about the 1099 versus the W-2 and all of that, you can have both. Because I remember my senior year of college, I was working for alternatives. I was an employee at a different company, and I was an independent contractor. So I had 2 W-2s and a 1099. And I was like, what in the world? Like, I'm so confused. But depending on what your work situation looks like, and I know there's so many opportunities to be an independent contractor right now. So just be aware that you might have multiple forms that you need to use.
That's right.
And again, you can ask somebody to give you a little bit more insight on what that looks like. But I did want to ask, you talked about like exemptions and deductions a little bit more earlier, but what is a tax exemption?
So, so if something, maybe a deduction, what's a tax deduction?
Yes.
Okay. So a tax deduction is something that would come from the Internal Revenue Code that, again, Congress makes these rules and says that you can deduct from your gross income $1 for doing something. For example, putting money into a retirement account, or if you spend interest under certain conditions for the place that you live in, be it a condo, a house, apartment, anything that you live. You can deduct the interest, not the principal, but the interest to borrow the money to go buy a place to live. Charitable contributions, those kinds of things. Those are deductions. I think the other thing that, so I get, if I make, $30,000 and I gave between my interest and I gave money to charity, let's say I had $10,000 in deductions, those would be deductions against my income. Now, again, if I just had $10,000, the government gives me 12 for free. So I would just take the 12, right? So you kind of weigh that, which one's more. But The two big things in personal tax returns are deductions and credits. Credits are things that go directly against the tax that I owe. So if after I've done all my income and all my deductions and I owe, let's just say $8,000 in taxes, but I have 4 kids, so I get some child tax credits, the ones that are younger. Mine are growing up, so I don't get as many as I used to. But the government just says, hey, again, this is just sort of like social engineering. Like, we appreciate you, Kenny, bringing, I guess, human beings into the world and taking care of them. So we're going to give you a deduction. We're going to give you a credit. Like, yeah. Good job for raising kids, I guess. I don't know what it is, but it's a dollar for dollar deduction against the tax I owe. Now, they're not big. They're $500 or $1,000. But instead of owing 8, I owe 7. So there's not a lot of different credits. Credits are very, very valuable. They're more valuable than a deduction because a deduction lowers the amount of income that I pay tax on. A credit is after I've done the computation to assess how much tax do I need to pay them or they refund back to me, it reduces the amount of my tax itself. So a credit is much more valuable than a deduction. But you can there's education credits, there's child tax credits, there's energy credits, they're pretty specialized, but child credits and educational credits are probably the most common. If I'm going back to school, or if I'm a college student or a grad student, or if I'm going to school, usually post high school, it's very common that you'd get educational credits. Again, government would like to encourage us to pursue education, so they make it slightly economically encouraging to the tune of a few $100, not enough to pay for it, but still, it's nice. It's like a pat on the back. So those would be things. The exemption would speak to, maybe that word would speak to more like organizations that don't pay tax. So like a charitable organization is exempt from taxes, that kind of a thing. But people aren't. There's no such thing as a tax exempt person. That would be nice, but we're not.
Right. Yeah, it would be nice. And so as we're filing our taxes and we're kind of looking at what we make, or maybe we're looking at what our brother makes or sister makes, or we all make a different amount, and do we all pay the same amount of taxes, or like are there different brackets, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that gets brought up a lot, especially around every election. But basically, the way we are structured right now, without getting into what people think they want to go to, is we have what's called a progressive tax system, which means the more that I make, the more I pay percentage-wise and actual dollar-wise of my income. So an absolute number, of course, is more, because if I make 30,000 or I make 50,000, I'm still going to be paying at that level. Let's say a married couple making $50,000 versus $30,000, they're still in a 12% federal bracket. So obviously 12% of 30 is less than 12% of 50, right? So absolute dollars, yes, I pay more tax, but bracket wise or relative dollars, we're paying the same. We're both paying 12%. Someone making 30, someone making 50, even someone making 70. That 12% bracket stops at 80,000, and then above 80,000, it starts ratcheting up and ratcheting up. So the brackets kind of go from 12 to 22% to 24%, and on and up. The highest bracket is 35% on the, 37%. There's a 37% bracket, federal. And then we live in state of California, which is the highest state tax structure. The only way you could get a higher state tax where you live is live in New York City, I believe. New York is pretty high. California is very high. And so ours go, kind of 3, 4, 5, 6. Most people kind of cap out at around 9%. If you're making, 40, 50, 60,000, you're probably in a 5, 6, 7% state on top of your federal. So if I'm paying 22% federal I'm probably at another 7% state. I'm probably paying about 30%.
Yeah, that's good. And with all of the things that you've shared, I feel like everything's like clicking in my head right now. It's all making so much more sense. And before, when we were talking about like the stress of filing taxes before we started recording, for me, it's stressful because I wait until the last minute and then I'm like on TurboTax trying to like rush and get everything done. And so now that I know this, that'll be so much more helpful going into filing taxes this year. But what are the steps to filing taxes?
Well, first of all, you wait to the last minute, like most of us do. And there's a couple of things that you can't file until you get your tax statements, right? Those are W-2s, or like you mentioned, you can have a combination of W-2s. Maybe I work a couple of jobs and or a 1099. So it depends on how complicated my structure is. But like you said, if I can use your example, you shared that you had a couple of W-2 jobs and a 1099. That's relatively complicated. That's 3 different forms of income coming to you, or 3 different sources, and 2 different filings. So you file a Schedule C on top of that. So not that you need to get really involved in Schedule Cs, but if you have a 1099, you put that on a different schedule. So that one you might take some time to do, but you at least wait till you get your W-2s and your 1099s. And then if you have any interest, like at a bank or anything, they send you statements on your interest to pay tax on. So hopefully we know that when we make money, we pay tax on the money that we make also, plus my basically any way that I get money, the government wants to tax you on it. So if it's positive for you, you probably pay tax on it. Probably. There are a few exceptions to that. So you got to wait till that. So that's usually January. The government does give companies and banks and all these things deadlines to do it. Generally, it's by January 31st. So really nobody's filing before January. But February, a lot of people do use a strategy where during the year they withhold perhaps more than they probably need to, so they get a refund. So maybe I've heard this too, that says, I didn't pay any tax this year. In fact, I got money back. Well, I would say, okay, that's a perspective, but truth be told, you did pay tax. In fact, you gave the government more than they wanted. In fact, what a refund is, the government says, hey, Kenny, no, you gave us more than you needed to. We're going to give you the change back. Like you overpaid for your burger, we're giving you the change back. That's what a refund is. And that's fine. Some people like to actually purposely over withhold so that when they file, and usually those people want to file early because they're getting money back. It's almost like a forced savings, right? As opposed to going to Chipotle and I use my, Apple Pay or something like that, I'm paying exactly. But if I pay them a 20 and they give me $11 back, oh, wow, I feel like I just got some more money back, so it's been saved all the way through the year from my paycheck. If that's a strategy, which is a very good one, I know people that like that, then they probably want to file in February because the sooner they get their money back. The government does not give you any interest. So you probably want to file sooner rather than later. Don't wait till September or October to file. File earlier. But other than that, then the government says, okay, we have to file by April 15th. That's why it's called tax day. Or if you need some extra time, file an extension and we'll give you another 6 months. So that pushes it out to October. And you can file any time in their period of time. That doesn't mean that's when you get to pay your tax. Your tax was already due. It's just to let us know how much tax you should pay us or we should pay you. We give you a bunch of time to file the return. But you should have, make no mistake, you should have already paid your tax. Otherwise, we're going to ding you. We're going to, what are called penalties and interest. So if you've not paid enough in, we're going to charge you interest on the tax. This being the federal and state governments saying we will charge you interest on the amount that you did not pay us because you should have. So going back to the withholding and, if I get refunds or not, it is a very good idea to try to pay in as closely as possible what I owe. because if I pay less than I owe, I'm just going to be paying interest and penalties on top of that. So it's a good idea to probably pay right about what I owe, or maybe just a tad more.
Yeah.
So timing wise, a lot of people like to file in February that are getting refunds, March. But I know people who don't file till later. Maybe sometimes things are complicated and they don't file till June or July with an extension, but.
Sure. Yeah, but if we file that extension, we're still responsible for the liability earlier. So that's a good thing to remember. It doesn't postpone our liability.
That's right.
This postpones the paperwork. So
it's like a past due notice. It'll just keep cranking and cranking on and on and on. Right. And then finally, when you pay it, they're like, oh my goodness, look at all this interest. Like, well, this bill was due way back when. So
well, what are some free resources that are out there to use when we file our taxes? We know that TurboTax, there's a fee for that. Is there any free resources that someone who has a more simple situation would be able to use?
Yeah, as much as the IRS has a huge amount of resources, actually, which you almost think, well, that's why I'm paying. Why would I want to go to that? They have, which is the Department of Treasury, but irs.gov has a tremendous amount of resources. I mean, frankly, a lot of people could do it on themselves by just going irs.gov. And again, just to sort of give some credit due, I think the government is really trying to make a lot of us where it's really not that complicated if I don't have too complicated of a structure. Sure. And so a lot of resources are there. Some pretty quick research or searches online would give, especially if I have, kind of a special needs situation. There are lots of charitable organizations that file taxes for free for people. I'm thinking like veterans, people, anyone from a recovering, that's kind of getting back into swing of things. If I've gone through some kind of life experience, either health related or that kind of thing. There are many organizations out there that will do tax counseling, tax filings for free or very, very nominal charge, like aka modest donation to our organization. We'll file your taxes for you. But especially anyone with some veteran/military experience, there are a number of organizations that will file taxes for those folks, with no charge. And then even like you mentioned, the turbo taxes and stuff like that, those are going to be under $100, probably in the 30, 50 range. And even with some personal advice, you could still do like any of the local tax preparers. And I'm not plugging for H&R Block, but the H&R Block and those kind are going to do a really good job for a relatively small amount, So they're somewhat modest. So but that's a great point. There's a lot of free resources if you wanted to look up, especially informational wise. Can I deduct this? irs.gov. I actually use it quite frequently.
Great.
That's so good to know. And I had no idea that there were organizations that help certain people out with their taxes. So that's awesome. Very cool. All right. So Kenny, one question that we ask all of our guests, just to give our listeners a better idea of kind of who you are and where you're at. What is a recent challenge that you have overcome or are overcoming?
A recent challenge that I have overcome or am overcoming. I don't know. I think it's probably a regular thing that a number of people do. It's not unique to me, but my kids are growing up, and so that's been an interesting dynamic. So I was raising all these younger kids for a long time, and now it's kind of launching them into young adults. So that's a interesting one. Let's see. There was one that was kind of more spiritual related, maybe a while back ago. And, some really, I would say, some people around that had some really good support from other Christian believing people that were really helpful. From a church point of view, was very helpful. So that was, I couldn't say enough about some of my really good relationships that were super helpful during that period of time. It wasn't recent necessarily. It was some years ago, but yeah, I would probably say now, looking at what's currently going on, a challenge, but it's a challenge as I look at the world as we are living in, and just from my heart point of view, my sons are from 24 to 15, almost 16. So I'm kind of in that young 20s-ish age, and teenagers, and what kind of world are they going to be moving into? And that's really just not even selfishly speaking my sons, but just that whole block of people in their 30 to 20s and 30s. Just what can we do to help support that? Because I look back when I was, let's just say, 25, and I think the world was a lot simpler back then. It wasn't so complicated. There was no Twitter. I didn't even have a phone. My goodness. Maybe I had a flip phone or something. Like, I remember sending, I was just kind of corrected this weekend because I had a person had called me. I called them back. I got their voicemail, and do you leave a voicemail anymore? No, of course you don't. So he's like, I'll just text that person. And a friend of that person said, oh, well, you can't text them. They only have a flip phone. I was like, I'm sorry, a what? So that's where I started. When I got going in life, maybe you had a flip phone. I mean, just life was a lot easier. It wasn't, you still had to work hard, but it wasn't so complicated. And so I guess my heart goes out to those in that beginning stage of life, and what I can do, I welcome and to help, because I think it would have been a lot more challenging for me if I had started back then. I mean, if I had started now versus back in the 80s and 90s, 90s-ish or whatever. So I guess that's probably one challenge, is probably, if there's one thing, now that's going to be a long time going, but that's okay. God's faithful. He'll persevere. People have been through worse than 2020. It's not good, but it's not the
and that's
worst.
important to remember.
I mean, I think back of, we just had Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th. I mean, you want to talk about tough times. Being a Christian in Poland in 1940. So I try to keep things in perspective. 2020 is rough. We just had a election year and all this stuff, but I mean, come on. Even today, there are people that need my support and prayers a lot more than maybe around here too.
Well, thank you, Kenny. It's great to always be able to hear the heart of our guests too, and just how we can overcome the things that are the struggles, and we all can relate in different ways. So really appreciate you saying that. But so our listeners, we always like to let them know that if they have any questions or to connect with Kenny, he's been really helpful today. And so if you do have any questions or would like more resources, please contact us at Alternatives. You can call us at our office line or email us. Our phone number is 760-741-9796. But hopefully we'll be able to get Kenny on again regarding more financial stuff in the future, because he's got a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. But Kenny, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great, and you just really were helpful and just so detailed in what you communicated to us. So I really appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. It's my pleasure being with you all.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. Think of who this episode might be helpful for and maybe send it to them. I know for me, I learned a lot and so much more clicked and made sense in my head. So I would imagine you probably know somebody that's in a similar boat. So really think of who you can share this with. And if you are on social media, we would love to connect with you. On Facebook, we are Alternatives Medical Clinic. Then on Instagram, we are just at Alternatives MC, and we will talk to you next time. Bye.